Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six Podcast, where we discuss the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Chang. Guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Email address in the description below. Send us your story ideas. Tell me how we can get better. And listen, we've got a guest on today. We are in full Kool-Aid season, as I'm liking to call it, but we got to welcome our family friend, our buddy, Alex Dono, to the show. Alex, how are you, my man? Welcome back.
Chris, I'm so happy to be back. And it was a really busy spring for Miami. And, now we just get to reflect on everything we saw for the past month, hope to win some more recruiting battles coming up into the summer. But yeah, it finally feels like it's officially the off season, because the time between the end of the playoff to spring ball, it was such a short period of time. It never really felt like the off season started until now.
Yeah, and that's a blessing, right? It's
Yeah.
something we haven't been used to in the past 2 decades. But before we get into the spring game talk, I want to put context to things, because I think sometimes people will immediately jump into these things and they'll be like, "Oh, what about this player or what about that?" And I want to set the context really quick. So, we know that spring games, we're not going to be showing our hands. Sometimes it's going to be vanilla in terms of the play calling and maybe who's out there. But this year was a different format than in years past and what a lot of other schools have been doing. So, what was kind of the format this year, Dono, and what did you see?
Yeah, so essentially the way Miami did it this year was it was really more of an open practice than it was a spring game. Like, some programs and in certain years Miami's done this where they'll treat it like a formal game where you don't have like normal drills and warm-ups. It's more like what you would do on a Saturday during the season. Miami decided, and the decision is understandable to do it the way that they did it from the point of view of the spring game is never like an extra thing that the NCAA lets you do. The spring game counts as one of the practices you're allowed to have during the spring period. So we've seen more and more programs start to either treat the spring game like a glorified practice, or there are some programs that have decided not to do any form of a spring game and just have a regular practice that's not open to the fans. So what Miami did was kind of a hybrid. They decided to practice, a field over at Cobb Stadium where they were able to bring in extra bleachers and stuff. So basically the fans got to watch a practice, but for 45, 50 or so minutes of that practice, it was a live scrimmage, which is the spring game component of it. So out there for, a little under 2 hours, they were out there. About the first half of it or the first third of it were, one-on-one drills, the type of stuff you would see if you were watching a normal practice. And those things can be entertaining. Like one of the highlights, Chris, of the one-on-one drills was Malachi Tony catching a crazy one-handed grab from Darian
Yes.
Mensa in the one-on-ones, which was the Tony highlight of the day, because he didn't participate in the 11-on-11s, for preservation, reasons. A handful of players, including Tony and Mark Fletcher and Marty Brown and Elijah Lofton, did not partake in the 11-on-11. Some guys on defense as well, like Muhammad Toure. But yeah, then after the drills, they got into the scrimmage work, and it was physical. That there was some live hitting. Like, they're not trying to kill each other, obviously. Like the quarterbacks were very protected, as quarterbacks always are these days. But it was a physical practice, and I think fans, most of the ones that I talked to, were pretty pleased with the body types of the team now and the physicality that they showed.
Yeah, that's what I've heard basically all spring. It's basically like the three key terms, SEO terms that I'm hearing is there's a lot of depth we're seeing out there, the physicality, and then the development. We're seeing players who are kind of really stepping up, stepping into these roles. But we did notice, you had kind of touched upon it with Mark Fletcher, with Malachi Tony. There were some notable names that were able to maybe get some extra rest from that CFP endurance race that we did last year. And then maybe some people got dinged up during the spring practices. Who were some other notable names that were kind of left out of the game, just so we have our bases covered when we're talking about the offense and defense moving?
Yeah, well, the big other one, in addition, well, there are a couple more that I didn't mention. Gerard Pringle, he had been banged up, so he didn't participate in the practice. Ahmad Moten, who's Miami's arguably their top defensive tackle, he had been banged up, so he didn't participate. And then when you talk about, stuff happening early in practice, everybody's been talking about wide receiver Josh Moore, who tweaked something at the early part of practice. It looked like a hamstring, and my understanding is that there's an expectation that it's nothing serious, but it did happen at the early part of practice. So as a result of that, with Malachi Tony being out of the 11 on 11 for, I think, for maintenance, or preservation, I think is the term that we use. Maintenance is an Eric Spoelstra term or an NBA term. Preservation, I guess, is the college football term. So with Tony out, and then Moore out for the 11 on 11s, I think one of the things that was really apparent about this Miami wide receiver group is those are two of your, in my opinion, top three receivers right there. Tony and Moore, and then Cooper Barkate, who did play, I think is the other top three guy. And despite being without two of your top three in the 11 on 11, the receiver room really shined.
Yeah.
Barkate had a handful of crazy catches. He caught a 29-yard touchdown from Mensa. He also went up on his ladder to go up and get this great ball, which was thrown into a tight window by Mensa. If Mensa had underthrown it, there was a linebacker that could have picked it off. Had he overthrown it, there was a safety behind. So he had to really thread the needle. And you can tell that he and Barkate, they played together last year at Duke. They have that sort of timing and chemistry down. And Dalen Upshaw, second-year receiver, who I view him as like the understudy for Malachi Tony. He was able to play a lot with Tony not playing, and Upshaw caught a 33-yard touchdown from Mensa, which was one of the better plays in the scrimmage. So, and also Dre Jacobs, another receiver, played pretty well. Young
From South
receiver
Carolina.
Milan Paris played well. And so even though two of your top three receivers were out, like you never would have known that if you didn't know who these guys are. You'd figure, oh, the receiver
Yeah.
core has everybody because they made a lot of plays.
Yeah, it's just a different looking team. I know you've been to spring games for several years covering the team. How does this? I want to get your overall thoughts, and then we'll go into the offense and the defense in a minute. But what were your overall thoughts of this spring game compared to the last 2 years? I'm not going to include like Mario's first year or pre Mario because I think we're in a different era as a team and a program. But compared to like the last two successful seasons, right? Well, I'll call them that. I think they're successful seasons. How does this spring compare to the last two?
Yeah, so talking spring games, I thought this one was a lot more exciting than the 2025 spring game. And a lot of that to me had to do with not having a QB1 available in last year's spring game because Carson Beck was coming off the elbow surgery. And so, last season it was Emory Williams, Luke Nickel as a true freshman, and Judd Anderson as the primary quarterbacks. And there wasn't a whole lot of spark except Malachi Tony. Malachi Tony last year, who did play as a true freshman the entire spring game, he was like the bright spot. But things were as vanilla as they were on Saturday. They were a lot more vanilla a year ago. So this one was more exciting than that one for that reason. And then going back to the spring game of 2024, that one was super entertaining 2 years ago because that was a Cam Ward masterclass. But something that stands out about that particular spring game was Ward had receivers that were open by 10 yards because
Yeah.
Miami's defense backfield, as we saw in the regular season that year, it was pretty bad. And it was
Yeah.
pretty bad in the spring game. So
Yeah.
Darian Mensa had a big day on Saturday, but he was throwing into some tight windows versus Cam Ward, who had guys that were open by a country mile. So I thought that this spring game was probably a little more balanced than the last two where we had because as good as Mensa played, the defense was pretty tight for the first couple of series. It took a couple series before Mensa and the first team offense really were able to open things up, and then like the second team and third team D had a lot of success against the second and third team offense. So I thought it was a pretty balanced scrimmaged overall this year compared to the last two.
And I love what you said there, because that actually brings me to this one thing that I keep hearing on the national scale. Nothing on like the local guys and the people who cover this team inside and out, but from the local perspective, I'm hearing guys talk about, because you're seeing all of these highlights of like Darian Mensah throwing to Cooper Barkade, Dalen Upshaw, Malachi Tony in the drill, and they're like, oh, Miami's defense is getting burnt. Miami's defense is getting burnt. What about like you're seeing all these wide receivers make these catches? But we know that, one play, it's the offense getting the win. The next play, it's a defense. It doesn't really mean. And if it's a 0-0, kind of like what the Gators had, their 45 tie, it's hey, maybe we're doing something good here. I don't know about the Gators, but maybe we're doing something good. So what would you say about the assumptions that people are coming out of this and they're like, hey, what's going on with this Miami defense? They've lost, Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Keontae Scott, all these crucial pieces. I kind of want to look at first the defense. What were your overall thoughts of the defense as a whole, going from first team to maybe third team?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the defense did pretty well. Specifically in the defensive backfield, and like you said, important context that, yeah, there were some receivers that made big plays, but it didn't mean the DBs overall weren't doing a good job. And a player that I'm really high on is transfer defensive back Omar Thornton, who came in for
Thumper.
Boston College. He's all over the field. He's a ball hawk and a hard hitter, and I really love that from him. On the defensive line, there were definitely some ups and downs. Sometimes the pass rush got home, but the times that they didn't get home, like, you're okay with it because then you're saying, hey, well, Miami's offensive line is blocking them. And I'll also, when we talk about the offense, I'm going to talk about Jackson Cantwell. But sticking with the defense for a moment, I thought Justin Scott did well. He's going to be a full-time starting defensive tackle this year. And I thought he looked very, very lively in the interior, and that was without the mainstay who's going to be next to him. Ahmad Moten was injured, so he didn't play in the spring game. But I thought Scott did well. Didn't really get an adequate picture of what the linebackers are going to be because their top two guys were either out or limited. Like, I don't think Muhammad Toure played at all. Maybe in the one-on-ones, but not in the 11-on-11s. And I don't think Chase Smith played much at all. He was limited as well. Did see some stuff from Kellen Wiley, who I think is going to be important backup this year, and a guy that continues to stand out for me that I think is going to be an important backup linebacker is Ezekiel Marcelin, who's
Oh,
heading into his second year. When he hits somebody, like, you can feel it from 30, 40 yards away. Like, when you're on the sideline and he collides with, a running back or a receiver, like, he's got a lot of pop and a lot of physicality. So I thought he's done really well. And I'm cautiously optimistic because linebacker is one of my question areas for the team.
same.
But, if we can continue to see some of the young depth players step up and continue to develop, that could be a really good sign for this year. So I've been pleased with the way Marcelin has played in the spring. And yeah, there were some times when Miami's rushing offense had success against the defense, but you're trying to figure out, is this more of a good thing for the offense or a bad thing for the defense? Like, when true freshman running back Javion Mallory is breaking tackles, like, is that because of how great he is, or are these
Right.
guys missing tackles? So but I thought the defense overall was fine, and I do think the defense were probably missing more of their regulars than the offense was. So that has to go into the evaluation as well.
Of course. And with that context in place, I know another huge question that a lot of people on the outside and people in-house too are probably asking, not in the program, but fans, what's this new D line going to look like? Because I mean, you had this dominance and these bookends and Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor. And then you had those guys that were in the trenches doing their thing. But now we've got this completely new look. There's talk of Armando Blunt going to end, even though he's more of kind of like an interior guy, or that's kind of where he's been pegged to go. What does this new D line look like, or what did you see? Obviously, not all the parts are there, but you can kind of piece things together and say, okay, he looks good. This guy looks good. What were your thoughts overall of this new look D line?
Yeah, I think there's a lot riding on Damon Wilson, the transfer from Mizzou, and he had a really good spring. He did play. I don't think he played like a full load of reps in the spring game, but he played a decent amount. And there was a rep or two that he definitely won against Jackson Cantwell, but there were some times, and I looked at it as a positive for Cantwell, where Cantwell really did a good job kind of canceling him out on some plays. So there were some good battles there. But Wilson is somebody, like, I got to interview him after the game, and standing a foot away from him, you get to see, like, he looks like a 30-year-old. Like, he looks like he's got a
Yeah.
mortgage now. Like, he's got that experience in his third or fourth year. fourth year, I think, now in college. And he's a guy who had 9.5 sacks in the SEC last year in the regular season. So I think there's a lot riding on Wilson. And I guess the big question would be who emerges on the opposite side. Marquise Lightfoot had some really good flashes last season and some good flashes in spring ball. The question a lot of people have about him is he going to be like physically sturdy enough to be like an every down defensive end? He's around 231 pounds. He's been very quick and effective as a pass rusher. But is he going to be able to hold up and be a good run stopper and everything like that? I think we'll find out as he's going to have probably a heavier workload this year. You mentioned Armando Blunt, and I like Armando a lot because I think he's a really complete defensive end because he's more in the 265 range. Like he's been an effective pass rusher. It looks like he's stout against the run, and I think he learned a lot from Ruben Bain, who's got a similar body type, playing with him over the past couple of years. So he's going to have an opportunity to step up. A couple of the younger guys, Herbert Scroggins has shown some good signs, and I was pretty high in the spring game. Booker Pickett Jr., I thought had
Ah,
some
yeah.
really good reps in the spring game. He's continuing to add size and physically mature. So, like, if things go well, Miami should have a good rotation of like 5 or 6 defensive ends who can play. And Hayden Lowe has been dealing with some personal stuff, so hopefully he's able to come back strong. Had the serious injury last year, so like I think there's a lot of high upside for the defensive ends. But yeah, as we all know, and Chris, you know this as well as anybody, you've got outside of Damon Wilson, who's very proven, you've got a lot of like unproven or yet to be proven guys who are really going to need to step up this year. The defensive tackles I feel really good about. Ahmad Moten comes off a great year. Justin Scott, I think, is going to be really good. And then having backups like Jarquez Carter, who had a good spring, and Keona
Keanu
Davis, who was a
Davis, yeah.
former starter in the Big Ten. He's really experienced. So I think like the interior, I think is going to be in great shape. But then obviously the edge rushers are going to have to try and fill some massive shoes that were left behind from last year.
Yeah, and I feel like as a program, you can kind of evaluate the overall health by seeing the seesaw, right? And you like for Cam Ward's year, it was like the offense was really high, but the defense was really low. And then like you get some positions where you're going to see maybe our linebacking core last year maybe wasn't as strong as our ends or our interior, but like now we're going to see an evening out of great talent. So like it's kind of going to be like a rising tide where I think our secondary make is going to get better, our safeties will get a little bit better or be just as good, but we're not going to see that dominance of the ends, but maybe the whole D line as a unit will be
Yeah.
producing at a similar level or, maybe a little bit worse. But again, I think as we'll get to in a few minutes, that offense is going to be clicking. Before we move to the offense, though, any concerns or anything you were like, gonna make a note of that, gotta watch out for that in the fall on the defensive side.
Yeah, nothing. I don't think anything that can't possibly be explained by having some guys out. They like there were some times where you're wondering, are they going to be as good against the run as they were last year? Is the pass rush going to be as potent as it was last year? I guess those are the questions that I have. I think the defensive backfield is going to be really good. I think there's enough continuity from last season, especially having Xavier Lucas and OJ Frederic back for this upcoming season. Damari Brown, I don't think played at all in the spring game. Ethan O'Connor had some ups and downs in the spring game, but I think overall he's a capable, like very capable fourth corner. Jabori Antoine is another corner that I'm pretty high on, a young corner. And, to be able to have Zechariah Poiser back this year at safety is big. So I feel great about the defensive backfield, even though replacing Keontae Scott won't be easy, but I think Omar Thornton is going to do an okay job there. Linebacker will remain a question to me until it's not. And then, there's some things we have to figure out about the defensive line. But I think overall, it's like a lot of nitpicky stuff. Like I think on
Yeah.
paper, this defense should be really good.
Yeah, and I just look at it like this. It's kind of like anything else. It's like, okay, it's not the strongest, or maybe we're seeing other parts of the defense excel so well, and that
Yeah.
maybe the linebackers aren't bad. It's just we're just seeing these bookend DNs just hold it down and keep the quarterbacks and the run game inside. We're gonna move over though. We're gonna talk about what everyone's talking about, what everyone has been excited about this entire spring, the offense. This apparently is going to be one of the best offenses we've seen since 2001, 2002. I know it's a bold statement, but I mean, I can't help. I mean, I have read article after article. I've seen blog or podcast after podcast of just how elite and the expansive weapons we have. What was your? I know again, we know not everyone played, but from what you saw on Saturday and what you've seen over these past couple of weeks, what are your overall thoughts of this offense heading into fall camp?
First of all, and I alluded to this earlier, I think there's an embarrassment of riches at receiver.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should be very thankful that there is no longer an April transfer portal because
Yeah.
there's so many guys competing to get on the field. If there was another transfer portal, you'd have to wonder if anyone might be seeing where their other options might be because and also maybe saying that is a little insulting because I think all these guys that are on the roster they want to be Canes, they want to compete. I'm a little tongue in cheek when I say that, but it like I mentioned earlier, two of your top three receivers didn't play in the spring game, and yet it was still guys making big time catch after catch after catch. You've got a lot of size in your receiver room of the bigger guys, like Cam Vaughn and Milan Paris are really kind of understanding how to use their bodies. And that's certainly the case for Josh Moore. Didn't see him in the spring game, but he's someone who's really shown off his physicality and he's been, catching balls over guys or mossing guys, as we like to
Yeah.
say, throughout the spring. I think it's great to have guys who can do that. And then, of course, also have players who can really make explosive plays like the Malachi Tonys, Dalen Upshaw. Cooper Barcade is kind of a good combination of both of those things. He's a really good route runner and also has really solid hands and can make things happen. So it's I don't the deepest receiving room till when I'm not even sure. I'd probably have to go look at some of the old school rosters, but probably the deepest receiver room they've had in 20 years at least. And you could say the same thing for running back. And
Yeah.
running back was another one where your top three from last year, who are all still on the team, none of them played in the spring game.
Yep.
Fletcher, Brown, and Pringle didn't play in the spring game. So, Jordan Lyle, who could be like, I don't know, anywhere between your second to your fourth back, depending on how the fall camp competition goes. I thought Jordan Lyle looked really good in the spring game as he had a tough year last year. He's trying to get back near the top of the rotation. You had some adversity last year with injuries and stuff. It wasn't just him, but he's
Right.
trying to work his way back up. And I thought specifically something that Lyle did well in the spring game was showing what a good receiver he can be out of the backfield because there were at least two or three catches that he had. And I loved how Darian Mensah is able to go through his progressions and take the checkdowns on occasion. And I think we're seeing that Jordan Lyle could make a difference as a receiver this year. And I thought Javion Mallory, the true freshman running back, and who knows how much he's going to be able to get on the field this year, but he's strong. He's really hard to
Yeah.
bring down. And he was able to extend some plays and get to the second level. And, Terrell Walden, who is I'm not sure if he's still a walk on. He's a former walk on. He was able to get into the end zone. So like even you're getting down to like your sixth or seventh
So,
back because there's also Chris Wheatley Humphrey who made some good plays. And so Terrell Walden is like the seventh guy. And he looked pretty good out there. And his teammates were really rooting for him. Like it was cool. They got all excited when he got into the end zone. So you're in really good shape there. The offensive line, I think they're going to be really good this year because you certainly trust the coaching and you trust the talent. I think the question that I have about the O-line is more about the second and third team than it is about the first team. Like I don't
yeah.
know if they have as much depth as they did a year ago. But like the top line starters, I know like Matt McCoy didn't have a perfect spring game at right tackle, but overall he's been really good in the spring and he is learning a new position because he was primarily a guard the last couple of years. I think he's going to be fine. Jackson Cantwell, I think, is one of the best stories on the team. The true
Yeah.
freshman left tackle. Um, he looks like a veteran out there, and I think what impresses me most about Cantwell, he's got the God-given size. He's 6'7.5", like 345, whatever it
He's a
is. He's a
skyscraper.
dancing bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, he moves so well, but also like how like his pass blocking is really coming along well
Oh,
because coming
awesome.
out of high school, at his high school, they had like 3 times the amount of production on the ground versus through the air. So it was a very run heavy offense he played in. So like I think he was more advanced as a run blocker, but his pass blocking techniques are looking like they're really coming along, maybe faster than you would expect, which is a really good thing. And Samson Okunlola, I think is going to be a starting guard. He didn't participate in the spring game. He's getting over an injury, so that's another one Miami's going to be able to roll out. But the offensive line, I think, is going to be good, just maybe not as deep. I talked about the question marks on the defense. I think the big question we all have on the offense is going to be the tight end room.
Mm,
Can
yeah.
Elijah Lofton, he didn't really play in the spring game, he did the 1-on-1s, but not the 11-on-11. Can he find consistency this year? Luka Gilbert in his second year, who's more of the traditional tight end body type. He's a giant. He's like 6'7". Can he optimize his consistency? He did have a really good catch in the spring game, was able to stretch out for it and showed good control. So I was happy to see that. Couple of the freshman tight ends, Gavin Mueller, who was he was limited, but he's had a good spring. Israel Briggs is he's more
Izzy.
advanced as a receiver, but he's sort of learning the blocking aspect of it. So there's potential there, but the tight end room didn't do enough last year, and we're kind of like looking at it with a wait and see approach for this year. But pretty much everywhere else they're loaded.
You know why I love you, Dono? Other than you being the guy you are, you answer my next three questions. You all just knocked them out of like in a row. I was like, all right. Like, what about the O line? You're like, got the O line. I'm like, all right. What about your concerns? Like, I got my concerns. But you know what? We kind of touched upon. You kind of touched upon it that I want to go into. Talking about freshman phenoms, guys showing up and showing out. There's been a ton of names that we've heard, but one of the names that I would love to talk about and hear what your perspective is JJ Dunnigan. We'll go over. Tell me what other freshman standouts you're talking about, but let's start with JJ Dunnigan because again, we've lost Jacoby Thomas and Keontae Scott. So there's that question at the secondary, who's going to fill in. I know we've gotten Clinton Portis' son in, Camden Portis. He's a young guy. Not sure he's going to be starting or getting second reps, but again, there's this guy, JJ Dunnigan, that I cannot stop hearing about. And that gets me super excited because when you hear the same people or different people talking about the same person, that probably means where there's smoke, there's fire. Tell me a little bit about what you know and what you've seen of JJ.
Yeah, like when you're out on the practice field and you just sort of like sit back and observe, you always notice who the dudes are. Like when
Yeah.
you just watch and you can see there's certain players, and when you're on the defensive side of the football, someone who's always around the ball, someone who has great instincts, moves well, but he's also a physical specimen. And something that's becoming more and more common during the Mario Cristobal era is not everybody comes in with a college ready body. There's always going to be certain players here and there who need to get through couple of years of the strength and conditioning program. But every now and then you get a JJ Dunnigan who comes in at 18 years old, or might have even been 17 when he enrolled early. And like he looks like he's already been in a college weight room for a couple of years. Like he's 6'4". I don't
Jeez.
know his exact weight. I think he's around 215 or 219, his father told me at the start of spring. And he's just physically he's there, and he's also one of those guys who gets better once the pads come on, which is another really good sign.
Yeah.
Dunnigan is someone like every practice I've been to, and then including the spring game, he does something special every single time out there. He had a couple of important tackles, and he had a pass breakup where he just blew up a screen in the spring game. So I think he's one of those guys, Dunnigan, who you're not going to be able to keep him off the field. The same thing with like Bryce Fitzgerald last year, who I think is probably going to be a starter at safety this year. But Fitzgerald was an important backup last year who made an impact and had 6 interceptions, and he sealed the win against Texas A&M in the playoffs with an interception. I think JJ Dunnigan is someone who can have that sort of an impact this year, even if he's not a regular starter. I think he can be a backup at safety and even at nickel, and I think he can get on the field a lot this year. So you're right to bring him up because I did a segment last week on Locked On Canes where I was kind of predicting who the freshman All-American are going to be on Miami this year. And my two names were Jackson Cantwell on offense, and I think JJ Dunnigan probably has the best chance to be that on defense.
And then on the offensive side of the ball, who are some guys? These are guys that I'm kind of keeping an eye on, just because what I think is unique about the team this year is in previous eras, we're getting these wide receivers who have these NFL, like you were talking. Harris, these guys are not guys that we have had plethoras of in our roster in the years past, but now we do. And I'm going into the fall, and then I'm looking at 2027, and I'm like, where are these guys going to be in a year from now when their bodies develop and things like that? What have you seen from these two young guys on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think SOMOURIAN Wingo, for my money, would be the one I think would be most likely to get into the receiver rotation year one. Although Milan Paris has been kind of coming on as of late. Like I think Wingo started off better, and then Paris was starting to ascend. And you talk about college ready bodies. I mean, I think maybe he has to like add a little more like lower body. I know that that's something my guy, the truth teller, is always harping on, but he looks pretty big to me. Like Milan Paris, he's 6'6", looks to be well over 200 pounds. SOMOURIAN Wingo, like I'll say that the reason why we didn't, talk about him in the spring game wrap up was he was another one who didn't participate in the spring game. But Wingo, true freshman receiver, has had a really good spring period. And then there are a couple of other freshman receivers who I do think could use maybe a little physical maturing. Tyron Evans, who is very long, but he does seem a little skinny to me. But Evans, I saw him on a couple of occasions in spring practice make some really athletic catches. Like
Nice.
he's a different guy. He's like 6'4", 6'5", so he's got the height. He
Yeah.
just has to kind of add more strength and power. And then Vance Spafford, who his weapon is going to be his speed. And
Mm.
Spafford, he had one of the better plays in the spring game. He was on the field, I guess, with the would have been the third team offense with Judd Anderson as his quarterback. He had a 40-yard reception in the game, which might have been the longest reception in the spring game total. So he did make his impact there. So you've got like four true freshman receivers who within the next couple of years, I think they're all going to be regular contributors. In terms of who gets on the field year one, I probably think Wingo would be the most likely, with maybe Milan Paris as well. And then 2027 and beyond, I think you'll see a lot more Tyron Evans and Vance Spafford as well.
It's funny you mentioned Judd, and there's not a player that I root for more than Judd. Just because when you see him, like I sometimes forget, and I'm like every time I see Judd come out of the tunnel for every game, I'm like, who is that guy? Because he's enormous as like a QB, and especially what we had of late. You know what I mean? Like maybe Cam, but like everyone, like you think of like De'Aaron King, right? Like 5'10" King, right? It's like, but you see Judd, and he is just like he looks like you're the lead, and it would be stupid if we did not talk. I think we got it. There's not a better fit for our program, but Dono, tell me a little bit about you've seen Cam, you've seen oh my Carson Beck. Wow, I can't believe I almost forgot his name. Poor guy. I'm so excited for Mensa. I forgot Carson Beck. I've heard 1,000 times that Mensa's a mix between the two. He's a happy medium. He's a Goldilocks medium. What are your thoughts on Darian Mensah? Give me the real, okay? No one watches my podcast, so if you say something, whatever, it's not going to really matter. I want your heart of hearts. What do you think of Darian Mensah, man?
He is deadly accurate. It's something that really stands out about him, and this is just the passing part of his game, and he has more to offer. Like in the spring game, he didn't throw a single turnover worthy pass. Like he never put
Wow.
the football in harm's way. And this is someone who last season at Duke threw 34 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions, and I think he can maybe cut the interceptions down even more this year at Miami. I'm hoping that's going to be the case because it's like I don't think in 4 weeks of practice I saw him throw more than like maybe one or two turnover balls in like 15 practices or whatever it was. Just really good accuracy. He especially like the over the shoulder fades and back shoulder fades. He's just really good at that stuff. So, when people talk about sort of the Goldilocks, like you mentioned, between Cam Ward and Carson Beck, like the way that comes into play is, you know, he's able to attack downfield in similar ways to Ward. I don't think he's going to take quite as many chances as Ward, which might be a good thing. Although
Yeah,
Cam Ward is so gifted, he was able to get away with throws that most quarterbacks are never going to be able to
ever.
get away with, right? Like when Ward would throw up something crossbody, back foot, you're like, don't throw that. Oh, thank you for throwing that. That's a 70-yard touchdown. Like,
Yeah.
most quarterbacks can't get away with some of that stuff. So where I think Mensa is a good cross between the two of them is Mensa is also willing to and intelligent enough to take checkdowns as well. So like he's better at attacking down the field than Carson Beck was. He's more similar to Ward in that aspect. But Ward was always going for the jugular. Like I think it was like 2/3 into the season in 2024. Like Shannon Dawson had to finally talk him into taking some checkdowns because I
Yeah.
don't I don't think he took a check down till like game 8 that year. Eventually he was kind of coerced into that. And then Mensa also maybe not quite at the level of Ward, but he also has the escapability. And that was a cool
Mm.
thing we saw a couple of examples of in the spring game. That when he had some pressure, he was able to kind of dance out of the pocket, extend plays, and find receivers down the field as he was on the move, which is something that Carson Beck had very limited success and that sort of thing. Was more of an on schedule guy. So I think that's really the magic of Darian Mensa. Like I don't think it's necessarily like he's necessarily comparable directly to Ward or to Beck, but I think something that Shannon Dawson, the OC, really likes about him is I don't there's really nothing he isn't good at. Like there's not really any limitation with Darian Mensa, and it seems like he's really immersed himself in the offense and he feels really comfortable in it. So I mean, I think he's one of the 3 to 5 best quarterbacks in the entire country. I think Miami's really lucky to have him.
Yeah, I think the Athletic had him ranked as the number one quarterback coming out in this
Yeah.
season, which I kind of have to agree. I'm like when you look around the country and you look at what he did last year at Duke, and again, no, nothing against Duke, but they they're Duke. But I'm looking at this player and I'm thinking he's just a more, I feel like he's a more calculated Cam Ward. Like he's like you said, he's not going to take those chances, but he has that ability to stretch the field, which again, love Carson Beck. I love what he did for us. I'm always going to root for Carson Beck no matter what. But the man had limitations, right? And I think now this year going into the 2026 year, I think we're going to see Shannon Dawson kind of be like, "Hey, the playbook's open now. We've got this a plethora of wide receivers in every variety that you could want. Like pick your weapon that you want, and we have a guy who we trust to make the right decision to thread the needle. Because that was another thing I heard. Like this guy throws darts, and there's windows there that you're just like, I don't know. Okay, like that. It's kind of like that, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
very confident in that. I do want to ask you this question though, because this was something that I noticed. Like Darian Coleman everyone's talking about him, but he is noticeably tiny compared to like
Mhm.
Mensa. And then we heard Emory Williams a little lackluster coming out of the spring game. Granted, we understand it was vanilla. Miami went and has done the portal thing for the last 3 years, right?
Well, you probably meant Luke, right? No, you said Emery, but you probably meant
Yes,
Luke Nichols.
sorry, Luke Nichols. Sorry, yes, sorry, brain fart.
No, you're good.
Um, looking now, because again, we know spring is kind of like an appetizer, not only for the year, but to see what you've got for the following year, the 2027, because you're not putting your first team all the way out there. Where do you think Miami is going to be a year from now? Do you think we're hitting the portal again? Because, and again, I know I'm asking you to go really in the future, but there was something that I kind of picked out of this game where I'm noticing it's eerily similar to the Cam Ward year when we were talking about like Emory, same thing last year with Emory. with Carson Beck. I'm hearing a very similar tone in terms of our backups. Where do you see us going in the 2027 season?
Yeah, I don't think the spring game was like the best picture or like microcosm of what they have in the quarterback room.
Oh,
Like
that's good.
you were right to say like Luke Nickel didn't really like do anything extraordinary in the spring game, but I think overall he did have a good spring. And
Oh, that's
I'm
good.
seeing development with Luke. Like one thing he's been able to do over the past year is really cut down on like the gunslinger throws, but gunslinger in a bad way. Because something that I know, and I kind of respected this about Luke, his first year, like last year when he was a true freshman, I think and there were certain things he could get away with at the high school level, but I think he sort of intentionally threw some really risky passes just to kind of figure out his boundaries, like how much can I get away with at the college level. But
Yeah.
the result of that was, he'd throw some interceptions in practice, he'd make some really good plays, but then he'd throw some picks, and it looks to me like I think he's figured out what those boundaries are. And Luke has been, and he's also got athleticism. Even though he didn't make a ton of plays in the spring game, but there was one play where he was able to tuck it and run and get downfield. Now, keeping in mind, quarterbacks are not getting tackled to the
Tuck.
ground, in spring games, but it still looked like he was able to pick up good yardage before there was serious contact. So he does have some athleticism, and he doesn't have the strongest arm, but he throws a pretty accurate ball. So there's definitely development there. On Judd Anderson, I don't necessarily think he's ever going to be a starter at Miami, but I do think there is development there from Judd. And he actually, after Mensa, who was far and away the top guy, I thought Judd actually had probably the second best from the quarterback spring game.
Yeah,
He
that's what I've
led a
been hearing.
touchdown drive. He had the 40-yard pass to Vance Spafford. So Judd did well in the spring game. But I think he's gonna be more of a depth guy. And then with Darian Coleman, I mean, you're spot on. Like he's just got to add size, hopefully, and of course, some of that's going to come just in the weight room. When it comes to the vertical stuff, at least like some guys still keep. I didn't grow from like 16 years old on, but some guys are still growing when they're like 18,
Yeah.
19. And so I did note that Darian between his like junior year and senior year of high school shot up like 2 inches. So maybe there's still some more room for him to keep growing, but he definitely has to add size in the weight room. But in terms of Coleman, you can't really teach the arm talent that he has. And like
Ooh.
I asked his private quarterback coach who worked with him starting when he was 8 years old and has worked with him for the last 10 years. It's like, that throwing motion of his, like how much of that was you like teaching him that, or how much of that was him? And he's like, honestly, I can help him with certain parts of his mechanics, he said, but that quick release of his, that's from God. Like that's
Yeah.
not something that I could teach. And so I'm just really hoping with Darian Coleman that the whole kind of aspect, the whole package for him can kind of catch up to where his arm talent is. But you asked me what's Miami going to do at quarterback a year from now. My honest answer is I don't think Mario Cristobal knows that yet. I think that's going to be a decision whether to go to the transfer portal again or not. I don't think that decision is going to be made until December of this year or even January of next year when the portal opens, because I think the evaluation from what they have in the room is ongoing. I think they do understand that, like, in some ways, it would probably be a good thing to eventually let somebody, homegrown have a chance for the job, just because, that does you a lot of goodwill on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
Although they were able to go out and land a 5-star quarterback, Israel Abrams, despite the fact that they've taken all these portal quarterbacks. And so, yeah, so next year, Abrams is going to be in the room. I don't necessarily think he'll be a true freshman starter, but his body is
Body
probably
type.
going to be
Yeah.
like more, yeah, his body will be more college ready, at 18 than Darian Coleman's
Coleman.
is. So maybe Izzy's got a chance. Coleman could have a chance. Nickel. So I think they're going to evaluate their backups for the entire season. And then, once the portal is about to open and they get a sense of who's going to be in the portal, I think that's where they're going to decide, is it worth it to go
Yeah.
bring another guy in. And it might be because if they feel like the next Darian Mensah or the next Cam Ward is going to be in that portal, they're not going to hesitate to go out and get that guy. But I don't think
Yeah.
it's a slam dunk that they do that with who they have in the room.
Now, I was in the other party where I was like, we need to develop someone in house, but now I'm like, hey, whatever it takes is the proof is in the pudding. We've done it 3 years in a row. Well, jury's still on the third year, but I have a feeling we're going to be pretty good. Before I let you go, Dono, one last question. What do you think needs to either be tightened up for fall, or what is something that that's stuck out to you in the spring? And you're just like, man, this gets me really hype for this upcoming fall.
Yeah, I think the big thing, a couple tweaks that they have to make is um, the center snapping the footballs. I don't
Ooh,
recall like so Ryan Rodriguez is the starting center. We think like it's trending that way. I
yeah.
don't recall him having any snapping issues, but the backup centers very erratic. I think there is some context there. So Reese Woodrow was working as the second team center. He's a true freshman, and Cristobal revealed like he was banged up. Like he probably didn't have to play in the spring game, but he powered through it. And a lot of his snaps were high. It looked off, but I think that's something that can be adjusted before the season. So I think that's a major thing, is really kind of shoring up your backup offensive line. Again, I want to see the tight ends become more consistent than they were last year. In terms of what I'm excited about, I think this team can score 40 plus points per game. Like
Yes.
I mean, based on what they have in the running back room and in the receiving core, and the quarterback that's going to be taking shots down the field, I think that gets me the most pumped. I think the defense, even if there is a little drop off on the defense, I don't think there's going to be much of a drop off, but I think the offense is going to be a lot more high flying. So that's what really gets me juiced.
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be, I said it earlier, referring to the offense, but I think this is going to be a Goldilocks year. I think we're gonna see what we've done the last 2 years and really dial it in. And I see us in Vegas. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what it is. Donna, you're doing a ton of amazing things on Locked On Canes. What are you working on? What do people need to know? Where do people need to go?
Thank you. Yeah, always go. We do shows every day. You can find Locked On Canes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, audio, video, wherever you get your pods. As far as what we're working on this week, so on Tuesday, Bruce Warner, Truth Teller Tuesday, is going to join me, and we're going to talk with Booker Pickett Sr., who's now got
Ooh,
two sons on the team.
the
He's got
dream.
Booker Pickett Jr. and Cannon Pickett, who was coming off an injury from high school, but a true freshman offensive lineman. I was standing a foot away from Cannon after the spring game, and he's another gigantic just
Human. Yeah,
dinosaur.
right?
They got this Jurassic Park offensive line. So we're going to talk to a former Miami player from the 90s, but also a proud dad of two Hurricanes. And then for the rest of the week, we'll probably be keeping our eye on hopeful commitments from four-star running back Myson Johnson Cook, who's going to decide over the weekend. Miami's very much in the mix for him. And I've done like the last couple days, Chris, I've done like my recap of the spring game, and so I'm going to zoom out later this week and talk more about the recap of like the entirety of spring ball is what I'm
Listen,
looking
man,
forward to this week.
I cannot wait. I tune in every day. I'm a one percenter. I'm proud to say that. My son has memorized your intro. It's actually really cute. That's your time, your insight, your expertise. Come back as many times as you want. I will not hesitate to ask. Hope you have a great day, my man. Well, guys, we have got another one in the books. Thank you all for joining me. Be good, win the weekend, and as always, go Canes.